Daniel Carter believed it would be a normal evening. The kind of quiet dinner that people in long relationships often have when life feels stable and predictable. The small Italian restaurant on Maple Street was warm and softly lit. The kind of place where couples came to celebrate small victories or simply escape the noise of the outside world. A gentle piano melody played through hidden speakers, while waiters moved between tables carrying plates of pasta and glasses of wine. Daniel sat across from Olivia Bennet, watching her with a calm smile, trying to enjoy the moment. They had been together for almost 3 years. In the beginning, their relationship had felt effortless. Daniel was quiet and thoughtful, someone who believed that love grew stronger through patience and trust. Olivia was more energetic, someone who could walk into a room and instantly become the center of attention. When they first met at a friend's birthday party, Daniel had been drawn to her confidence, while Olivia had liked how steady and sincere he seemed. Their personalities balanced each other in a way that felt natural during the early months of their relationship. Everything had moved quickly. They spent long evenings talking about dreams and plans. Daniel worked as a financial analyst at a small investment firm, while Olivia worked in marketing for a fashion company. Their schedules were busy, but they always found time for each other. Weekend road trips, late-night coffee runs, and quiet walks in the park slowly built the foundation of their life together. Daniel had always believed that relationships were simple if two people respected each other. Trust was the most important thing for him. Once you gave your heart to someone, you protected that trust carefully. For a long time, he thought Olivia felt the same way. But in recent months, small changes had started appearing like tiny cracks in glass. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just little things that didn't feel quite right. Olivia had become more distracted when they were together. Sometimes she would scroll through her phone while Daniel talked about work. Sometimes she laughed quietly at messages and then quickly locked the screen when he looked over. When he asked who she was talking to, she always answered casually, saying it was just coworkers or friends. Daniel never pushed the subject. He didn't want to seem insecure or suspicious. After all, people deserved privacy. Still, the changes stayed in the back of his mind like a question he couldn't quite answer. Tonight was supposed to be different. Daniel had received a promotion at work earlier that day, something he had been working toward for almost 2 years. His manager had called him into the office that morning and offered him the position of senior analyst. The job came with more responsibility, but it also meant better pay and more stability for the future. Daniel's first thought had been Olivia. He imagined celebrating together, maybe even planning the vacation they had talked about many times, but never actually taken. A small trip to the coast, somewhere quiet where they could relax and reconnect. So he had called Olivia during lunch and invited her to dinner. She sounded happy on the phone, though her voice carried a hint of surprise. "That's amazing," she said when he told her about the promotion. "We should definitely celebrate." They agreed to meet at the Italian restaurant near her apartment, the one they had visited several times before. Now they sat across from each other at the small round table near the center of the room. Candlelight flickered between them, reflecting softly in Olivia's dark eyes. Daniel watched her as she stirred the ice in her drink with a small straw. She looked beautiful, as she always did. Her hair fell gently over her shoulders, and she wore a simple black dress that made her look elegant without trying too hard. But something about her mood felt distant. "So," Olivia said, breaking the silence with a polite smile, "does this mean you're finally getting the office with the window?" Daniel laughed lightly. "Yeah, actually," he said. "I get the corner desk now." "That's good," she replied. Her tone was supportive, but it lacked the excitement Daniel expected. He brushed the thought aside and kept smiling. "I was also thinking maybe we should finally take that trip we talked about," he added. "You know, the one near the coast." Olivia paused for a moment before answering. Her eyes briefly moved to her phone, which rested face down beside her plate. "Maybe," she said. "That could be nice." Daniel noticed the hesitation, but chose not to mention it. The waiter arrived then, carrying 2 plates of pasta and placing them carefully on the table. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air. Daniel thanked him and picked up his fork, trying to bring the conversation back to a comfortable place. They talked about work for a while. Olivia described a new project her team was working on. Daniel listened attentively, nodding and asking questions when she paused. But even as they talked, Olivia kept glancing at her phone. Each time the screen lit up with a message notification. Her eyes shifted toward it almost automatically. Daniel pretended not to notice. After dinner, they sat quietly while the waiter cleared the table. Olivia leaned back in her chair and stretched slightly, looking around the restaurant as if searching for something interesting. Daniel studied her face, trying to understand the distance he felt. 3 years was a long time, long enough to recognize subtle changes in someone's behavior. Still, he reminded himself that people had stressful weeks. Maybe work was overwhelming her. Maybe she was just tired. The waiter returned a few minutes later and placed the bill neatly in the center of the showcase of the table. Daniel reached for it without hesitation. "I'll take care of this," he said. Olivia nodded, casually. "Okay?" Daniel stood up and walked toward the front counter near the entrance. The restaurant was calm at that hour. A few couples chatted quietly at nearby tables, and soft laughter floated through the air. As Daniel waited in line to pay, he glanced back toward the dining area. From this distance, Olivia looked relaxed. Leaning back in her chair and checking her phone again, Daniel felt a small wave of affection for her despite the strange mood between them. Relationships weren't perfect all the time. What mattered was commitment. The cashier greeted him politely and began processing the payment, while Daniel waited for the receipt. Something unexpected happened. A man approached Olivia's table. Daniel noticed him immediately because he didn't look like a waiter or a customer searching for a seat. He walked with purpose, moving directly toward Olivia as if he already knew exactly where she was. The man was tall, maybe in his early 30s, dressed neatly in a dark jacket. His posture was confident but relaxed at first. Daniel assumed it must be a coworker or a friend. People often ran into acquaintances at restaurants, but when the man reached the table, Olivia reacted in a way that made Daniel pause. Her expression changed instantly. She looked surprised, but not the kind of surprise people show when they see someone unexpected. It was the nervous kind, the kind that carried hidden meaning. Danielle watched as Olivia leaned slightly forward in her chair. The man smiled at her. Then Olivia laughed softly from across the room. Daniel couldn't hear every word yet, but the tone of her voice sounded different. From how she had been speaking to him all evening, it was lighter. Almost excited, the cashier handed Daniel the receipt and began explaining something about the payment. But Daniel barely heard her. His attention remained fixed on the table behind him. The man stood beside Olivia. Speaking quietly, curiosity crept into Daniel's mind. He shifted slightly, pretending to organize his wallet while trying to listen. The restaurant was quiet enough that certain words carried through the air. That was when he heard Olivia whisper something that made his stomach tighten. "I thought you weren't coming tonight?" The man chuckled. "Relax," he replied in a low voice. "Your boyfriend doesn't suspect anything, right?" Daniel felt the world around him suddenly slow down. For a moment, he wondered if he had misunderstood the words. But Olivia answered quickly. "I told you," she said softly. "He trusts me completely." Daniel stood frozen near the counter, the receipt still in his hand. The warm restaurant suddenly felt cold, and in that moment, he realized the evening he thought would be a celebration was about to become something completely different. Daniel felt his heart pounding in his chest as he stood near the counter, pretending to examine the receipt while his mind raced. Every instinct told him to run back to the table, confront Olivia, demand an explanation. But a strange part of him wanted to stay just a little longer. He needed to understand what was happening, needed to hear the truth for himself before reacting. He stayed frozen, pretending to fumble with his wallet, while his eyes stayed fixed on Olivia and the man beside her. The restaurant's soft music and muted chatter seemed to fade into the background. All Daniel could focus on was the conversation unfolding just a few meters away. Olivia's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but Daniel caught every word. She leaned slightly closer to the man, her posture relaxed as if they shared a familiarity that Daniel no longer had. "You're taking a big risk coming here," she said. Daniel's stomach tightened. The words were simple, but the tone carried a weight he didn't understand. The man chuckled softly, replying, "Maybe, but I missed you." Those 3 words hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. He had never heard her use that tone, that intimacy with him. The idea that someone else could claim a piece of Olivia's heart made Daniel's breath catch in his throat. He tried to steady himself, telling himself that he could be mishearing, that maybe it was innocent. But the small movements between them, her leaning in, his hand brushing hers, told a different story. Daniel had always trusted Olivia completely. He had never doubted her, even when the subtle changes in her behavior had given him fleeting worries. He remembered the nights she had stayed out late, her excuses always plausible. The weeks she had been distracted by work or friends. He had never imagined that those little gaps were being filled by someone else entirely. The realization made his hands tighten around the receipt in his grip. The man sat down casually in the empty chair across from Olivia, as if he belonged there. She didn't seem startled, didn't pull away. Instead, she gave a brief glance toward Daniel's position near the counter, perhaps sensing someone nearby, but she didn't show concern. Her calmness made Daniel feel a knot of confusion in his chest. Why wasn't she startled? Why wasn't she worried about him seeing this? It felt like a betrayal that had been hidden so carefully, so deliberately. And it made him question everything about their relationship. Daniel's mind raced, piecing together tiny fragments from past weeks. Her distracted smiles at her phone, her sudden need for privacy, the late-night texts she always excused as work-related. None of it had made sense at the time, but now it all clicked. It was never just work or friends. It had been something more, something deliberate. His chest ached with the weight of the realization. Trust, once a solid foundation in their relationship, now felt fragile, like glass that could shatter at any moment. The conversation continued. Olivia's tone was soft, careful, but Daniel could hear the tension between the words. "I can't tell him," she whispered. "It's too soon. He doesn't deserve to know." The man replied with a low, measured voice, "But it's not fair to either of you to keep living like this." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to yell, to storm over, but a part of him held back. He wanted to hear everything, to understand the depth of what he had been missing, the depth of her deception. Her words carried both guilt and a strange affection. A tug-of-war that Daniel had never been part of. The man reached across the table, gently touching Olivia's hand. She didn't pull away. The small gesture was enough to make Daniel's heart sink. There had been a tenderness in that movement, a comfort that she had once shown to him, now reserved for someone else. The more Daniel observed, the clearer it became that this wasn't a brief encounter. It was the continuation of something long-standing. The familiarity between them was undeniable. This was not the excitement of a new acquaintance. This was intimacy built over time, hidden behind a careful facade. Daniel felt a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Anger, yes, but also heartbreak and disbelief. He had loved her completely, trusted her without reservation, and yet here she was, sharing moments meant to be private with someone else. It wasn't a single betrayal. It was a series of moments that had accumulated over weeks or months, each one a secret he hadn't known existed. The realization hit him like a wave. Everything he thought he knew about their relationship was wrong. The quiet dinners, the smiles, the conversations, they had been undercut by a hidden reality. He could hear them laughing softly. The kind of laughter that belongs to people who understand each other in ways Daniel and Olivia no longer shared. "You always say that," the man said, his tone light but intimate. "But you're still here with him." Olivia's response was a quiet sigh. "I know. It's complicated, she murmured. Daniel's hands balled into fists. The word complicated suddenly seemed cruel, as if it were a justification for breaking his heart while keeping him in the dark. The realization that she had knowingly continued a relationship with him while maintaining another connection made him feel both powerless and betrayed. Despite the pain, Daniel remained silent. He wanted to scream, to confront them both, but something in him held back. Perhaps it was the need to process the truth before reacting. Perhaps the desire to witness the entire conversation to understand the depth of what had happened. He took a deep breath, focusing on each word that floated across the room. Olivia's hesitation, her soft tone, the way she looked down at the table, all of it painted a picture he had not expected. A story of hidden choices and private affection that had excluded him entirely. The man spoke again, quietly but firmly. "You can't keep living like this forever." Olivia's eyes lowered. "I know," she whispered, almost to herself. Daniel felt a cold realization settling over him. This wasn't impulsive or fleeting. This was a deliberate, ongoing connection that had been nurtured in secret. She wasn't reckless. She had made conscious choices to maintain both relationships, to manage her guilt while keeping him unaware. It wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was something much more intentional. And it shook Daniel to his core. He remembered all the moments in their past, trying to find patterns that could explain this. The extra attention she had given to certain friends. The excuses that had seemed trivial. The times she had brushed off questions with casual answers. Each memory now felt tainted with a shadow of doubt. The trust he had placed so fully in her had been misplaced, and he felt a mixture of grief and anger at the same time. He had loved her genuinely, completely. And yet he had been blind to this part of her life. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to anticipate what would happen next. The man leaned closer to Olivia, speaking softly. "We should be honest, eventually," he said. Olivia shook her head gently. "Not yet. He's a good person. He doesn't deserve to be hurt like that." Daniel's chest tightened. She had known, and yet she had continued to maintain the relationship with him. The intention to protect him, though understandable, felt like a cruel twist. Protecting someone from the truth while letting the deception continue was a betrayal of the heart. And Daniel felt the weight of it pressing down on him. Time seemed to stretch. Daniel stayed near the counter, feeling every second pass with increasing tension. His mind shifted between memories, present observations, and imagined futures. He considered leaving immediately, confronting Olivia with what he had heard, demanding explanations, but a small part of him needed to witness everything. He needed to hear all the words, all the nuances, so that when the confrontation came, he could face it with clarity. He realized that this moment, though painful, was pivotal. It was the turning point where he had to decide how to move forward, not as a naive lover, but as someone who finally understood the hidden layers of the relationship. The conversation continued, each word cutting deeper into Daniel's sense of security. Olivia's soft voice, tinged with guilt, affection, and hesitation, revealed the complexity of her emotions. The man's calm and familiar presence suggested that this was not a passing fling, but a relationship with depth and history. Daniel's stomach churned as he imagined how many moments, how many small choices had been made behind his back. Every laugh, every whisper, every gesture he had once shared with Olivia now felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. Daniel felt the sting of disbelief and sadness, mingled with a strange sense of clarity. The truth, once hidden, now lay bare in front of him. He understood that Olivia was not heartless, not cruel, but that love could be messy, imperfect, and sometimes split between two paths. Her hesitation, her careful words, her soft laughter, they all told a story of a woman torn between loyalty, desire, and fear. And Daniel, despite the pain, knew he had to decide how to respond, how to reclaim his life from the shadows of betrayal. The man reached across the table again, brushing Olivia's hand gently. She didn't withdraw. Daniel's heart sank. This intimacy, this quiet connection was something he could not ignore. The realization that it had existed while he had trusted her completely made him feel like an intruder into a world that should have been his. His love had been real, but so had the other bond she maintained. And now he had to reconcile these conflicting truths in his mind. Each word, each gesture deepened the ache inside him, yet also strengthened his resolve to confront the reality and act with clarity, not rage. Daniel stepped closer to the table, his movements calm, almost deliberate. Every step felt heavy, yet light at the same time, as if his body and mind were moving through a haze of shock and clarity at once. He could feel the tension in the air before he even reached them. Olivia's eyes widened the instant she saw him approaching, and for a second she looked frozen. Her carefully maintained composure cracked ever so slightly, and Daniel noticed it immediately. The man sitting across from her also turned slowly, realizing the dynamic had shifted. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not gesture wildly. He simply stopped beside the table and looked at both of them quietly, letting the weight of his presence speak for him. Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she pulled it back from the man. Her expression carried a mixture of fear, guilt, and something that could almost be mistaken for pleading. She opened her mouth, probably to explain herself, to justify what Daniel had overheard, but the words didn't come out smoothly. She started, her voice breaking ever so slightly. Daniel remained calm, his expression neutral, his eyes steady. He placed the receipt he had been holding gently on the table. "It's paid," he said softly. The words were simple, but in them was a quiet finality. The man rose from the chair immediately, the tension between them now palpable. "I think I should," he began, uncertain. Daniel, still standing calmly, replied without anger, his voice steady. "You should." The man hesitated for a moment, glancing at Olivia, then left the restaurant without another word. His presence had vanished, but the impact of what had been revealed lingered like smoke in the air. Daniel now faced Olivia alone, and the quiet that settled over the table was suffocating, filled with the unspoken truths between them. Olivia lowered her eyes, avoiding his gaze. She looked as if the weight of her choices had finally caught up with her. "Daniel, it's not what it looks like," she whispered. But Daniel had heard enough. The tone of her voice, the way she had looked at the other man, the comfort they shared, it had already painted a clear picture. Daniel gave a soft, tired smile, the kind of smile that carried more pain than relief. "That sentence," he said quietly, "usually means the opposite." He wanted her to understand that he knew that he had heard everything, and that no excuse could erase the truth of what had happened. Olivia's lips trembled, her eyes glistening with tears she had tried to hold back. "I was going to tell you," she murmured, as if saying it now could somehow undo the choices she had made. Daniel's heart twisted at her words, but he remained composed. He had loved her fully, had trusted her fully. And now he was forced to reconcile that love with the truth he had just learned. "When?" he asked gently. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet ache that came from the realization that sometimes love alone is not enough to keep a relationship intact. She didn't answer. The silence between them was loud, carrying years of memories, plans, dreams, and the stark betrayal of secrets kept. Daniel observed her closely, noticing the small gestures she had always used to show affection, the way she touched her hair when nervous, the tilt of her head when listening, but now those gestures felt hollow, redirected to someone else. 3 years of shared experiences, laughter, and quiet evenings suddenly felt fragile, as if they had been built on a hidden layer that he had never seen. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew the next words he spoke would define the final moments of this chapter of their lives. "Do you love him?" he asked softly, not accusing, not demanding, just asking. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, the hesitation lasting only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Her silence spoke louder than words. Daniel felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief because the truth was finally out. Heartbreak because the person he loved had been emotionally elsewhere. He nodded slowly, almost as if confirming a painful truth he had already suspected. "I understand," he said. His tone was calm, measured, but the quiet depth of sorrow beneath it was unmistakable. Olivia's eyes widened, with a mix of fear and disbelief. She looked up quickly, searching for anger, blame, anything that might bridge the gap between them. But Daniel only offered a composed acknowledgement of reality. She had known what she was doing, and he had finally confronted it not with anger, but with clarity. Tears rolled down her cheeks, breaking the carefully maintained composure she had held during the evening. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in hours. He saw remorse, confusion, longing, but he also saw a certainty that this connection with the other man was something she could not ignore. She wasn't cruel, but she had chosen a path that didn't include him entirely. Daniel had loved her unconditionally. Yet now he realized that love alone could not hold her. Daniel stood for a moment, letting the silence linger. He thought about all the small things, the subtle smiles, the phone messages, the distractions he had brushed aside. Every memory now carried a shadow of doubt. Yet, in that quiet moment, Daniel felt something shift within himself. Pain, yes, but also clarity. He had been blind, trusting completely, but now he could see. The relationship had changed fundamentally, and it was his responsibility to protect his heart, even if it meant letting go. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Daniel said softly, his words carrying both farewell and understanding. There was no bitterness, no rage, just acceptance. He could see Olivia's tears, the regret, the emotional turmoil, and he understood that this was not about punishment. This was about acknowledging the truth and stepping away from a situation that no longer served his well-being. The moment was heavy, but it also held a strange liberation. Daniel walked toward the exit slowly, each step deliberate. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside, sharp against the warmth he had left behind. He paused under the streetlight, looking back at the restaurant. Inside, Olivia sat at the table, her face a mixture of sorrow and contemplation. The scene he had just witnessed would remain etched in his memory, but now it was behind him. The weight of the betrayal was painful. Yet there was also freedom in the truth. As he walked down the quiet street, Daniel thought about the future. The relationship he had envisioned, filled with shared dreams and quiet moments, was over. But the ending, though painful, gave him a chance to start anew. He realized that sometimes love is not about holding on. It is about recognizing when paths diverge and finding the courage to walk forward alone. The clarity he felt now was both liberating and bittersweet. Memories of Olivia flooded his mind, her laughter, her warmth, the comfort of years spent together, but he knew they were memories now, not promises of the future. He thought about all the times he had trusted her completely, how he had defended their love against doubts, how he had believed that loyalty and honesty were shared values. And yet the truth he had overheard showed him a different reality, one that required him to redefine his understanding of love and trust. The walk home was quiet, each step echoing in the empty streets. Daniel reflected on the subtle signs he had missed, the changes in Olivia's behavior that he had explained away as stress or distraction. Now he understood that those signs had been hints of a growing divide, of choices made in secrecy. The realization was painful, but it also strengthened his resolve. He would not allow this hidden betrayal to define him. He would carry the lessons forward, protect his heart, Akana, and trust again, but more wisely. By the time Daniel reached his apartment, the weight in his chest had shifted from raw pain to contemplative sorrow. He realized that heartbreak could be a teacher, a guide towards self-respect and clarity. The love he had given freely had been real, but it was no longer reciprocated in the same way. That knowledge, though difficult to bear, allowed him to step into the next chapter of his life with eyes open, heart cautious but resilient. He sat on the edge of his bed, letting the quiet of the room absorb him. The world outside continued, oblivious to the evening's revelations. Daniel's thoughts returned to Olivia, her choices, her regret, her conflicting emotions. He understood that she was not entirely at fault. Love is messy, emotions are complex, and sometimes hearts follow paths that don't align. But for Daniel, the lesson was clear. Trust must be earned, not assumed, and self-respect must never be sacrificed, even for the sake of love. As the night deepened, Daniel allowed himself to feel the sorrow fully, to acknowledge the loss and the betrayal. But he also felt a flicker of strength, a sense of freedom that came with seeing the truth clearly. He would heal. He would move forward. And one day he would love again, but this time, with eyes wide open, heart intact, and wisdom gained from the painful clarity of that night. Daniel finally closed his eyes. The memories of the evening still vivid, the emotions raw but managed. He understood that heartbreak was not just about losing someone, it was about discovering the truth of who we are, what we deserve, and the courage it takes to step away when love no longer honors the heart it once promised to protect. And with that understanding, he let the night carry him toward sleep, toward healing, and toward the possibility of a life rebuilt from honesty and self-respect.